Chapter 9. His father woke him up at 5:30 the next morning. "Come on, son," he said, shaking Rob's shoulder. "Come on, you're a working man now. You gotta get up." He took his hand away and stood over Rob for a minute more, and then he left. Rob heard the door to the motel room squeak open. He opened his eyes. The world was dark. The only light came from the falling Kentucky star. Rob turned over in bed and pulled back the curtain and looked out the window at the sign. It was like having his own personal shooting star, but he did never make a wish on it. He was afraid that if he started wishing, he might not be able to stop. In his suitcase of not thoughts, there were also not wishes. He kept the lid closed on them, too. Rob leaned on his elbow and stared at the star and listened to the rain gently drumming its fingers on the roof. There was a warm, glowing kind of feeling in his stomach, a feeling he wasn't used to. It took him a minute to name it. The tiger. The tiger was out there. He got out of bed and put on shorts and a t-shirt. "Still hot," his father said when Rob stepped out the door. "And still raining." "Uh-huh," said Rob, rubbing his eyes. "Yes, sir. If it don't stop soon, the whole state ain't going to be nothing but one big swamp." "The rain don't bother me," Rob muttered. On the day of his mother's funeral, it had been so sunshiny that it hurt his eyes. And after the funeral, he and his father had to stand outside in the hot, bright light and shake everybody's hand. Some of the ladies hugged Rob, pulling him to them in these jerky, desperate movements, smashing his head into their pillowy chests. "You don't look just like her," they told him, rocking him back and forth and holding on to him tight. Or they said, "Oh, you got your mommy's hair, that cobwebby blonde." And they ran their fingers through his hair and patted his head like he was a dog. And every time Rob's father extended his hand to somebody else, Rob saw the ripped place in his suit, where it had split open when he slapped Rob to make him stop crying. And it reminded Rob again, do not cry, do not cry. That was what the sun made him think of, the funeral. So he didn't care if he ever saw the sun again. He didn't care if the whole state did turn into a swamp. His father stood up and went back into the motel room and got himself a cup of coffee and brought it back outside. The steam rose off it and curled into the air. "Now that I'm a working man," Rob said shyly, "could I drink some coffee?" His father smiled at him. "Well," he said, "I guess that'd be all right." Rob went inside and poured himself a mug of coffee and brought it back outside and sat down next to his father and sipped it slowly. It tasted hot and dark and bitter. He liked it. "All right," his father said after about 10 minutes. "Time to get to work." He stood up. It wasn't even 6 o'clock. As they walked together alongside the back of the motel to the maintenance shed, his father started to whistle, "Mining for Gold." It was a sad song he used to sing with Rob's mother. Her high, sweet voice had gone swooping over his dad's deep one, like a small bird flying over the solid world. His father must have remembered, too, because he stopped halfway through the song and shook his head and cursed softly under his breath. Rob let his father walk ahead of him. He slowed down and stared into the woods, wanting to see some small part of the tiger, a flick of his tail or glow from his eyes, but there was nothing to see except for rain and darkness. "Come on, son," his father said, his voice hard, and Rob hurried to catch up. Chapter 10. Rob was sweeping the laundry room when Willie Mae, the Kentucky Star's housekeeper, came in and threw herself down in one of the metal chairs that were lined up against the cement block wall. "You know what?" she said to Rob. "No, ma'am," said Rob. "I'll tell you what," said Willie Mae. She reached up and adjusted the butterfly clip in her thick black hair. "I'd rather be sweeping up after some pigs in a barn than cleaning up after the people in this place. Pigs at least give you some respect." Rob leaned on his broom and stared at Willie Mae. He liked looking at her. Her face was smooth and dark, like a beautiful piece of wood. And Rob liked to think that if he had been the one who carved Willie Mae, he would have made her just the way she was, with her long nose and high cheekbones and slanted eyes. "What are you staring at?" Willie Mae asked. Her eyes narrowed. "What are you doing out of school?" Rob shrugged. "I don't know," he said. "What do you mean you don't know?" Rob shrugged again. "Don't be moving your shoulders up and down in front of me, acting like some skinny old bird trying to fly away. You want to end up cleaning motel rooms for a living?" Rob shook his head. "That's right. Ain't nobody wants this job. I'm I'm the only fool Beauchamp can pay to do it. You got to stay in school, she said, else you'll end up like me. She shook her head and reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a single cigarette and 2 sticks of 8-ball licorice gum. She put one piece of gum in her mouth, handed the other one to Rob, lit her cigarette, leaned back in the chair, and closed her eyes. Now, she said, the scent of smoke and licorice slowly filled the laundry room. Go on and tell me why you ain't in school. On account of my legs being all broken out, said Rob. Willie Mae opened her eyes and looked over the top of her glasses at Rob's legs. She said after a minute. How long you had that? About 6 months, said Rob. I can tell you how to cure that, said Willie Mae, pointing her cigarette at his legs. I can tell you right now. Don't need to go to no doctor. Huh? Said Rob. He stopped chewing his gum and held his breath. What if Willie Mae healed him and then he had to go back to school? Sadness, said Willie Mae, closing her eyes and nodding her head. You're just keeping all that sadness down low, in your legs. You're not letting it get up to your heart where it belongs. You gotta let that sadness rise on up. Oh, said Rob. He let his breath out. He was relieved. Willie Mae was wrong. She couldn't cure him. Principal thinks it's contagious, he said. Man ain't got no sense, Willie Mae said. He's got a lot of certificates, Rob offered. They're all framed and hung up on his wall. I bet he ain't got no certificate for sense, though, said Willie Mae darkly. She rose up out of her chair and stretched. I gotta go clean some rooms, she said. You ain't gonna forget what I told you about them legs, are you? No, ma'am, said Rob. What'd I tell you then? She said, towering over him. Willie Mae was tall, the tallest person Rob had ever seen. To let the sadness rise, Rob said. He repeated the words as if they were part of a poem. He gave them a certain rhythm, the same way Willie Mae had when she said them. That's right, said Willie Mae. You gotta let the sadness rise on up. She left the room in a swirl of licorice and smoke. After she was gone, Rob wished that he had told her about the tiger. He felt a sudden desperate need to tell somebody. Somebody who wouldn't doubt him. Somebody who was capable of believing in tigers.